It's 7 o'clock. I'd like to welcome Cabinet and officers tonight and members of the public who are joining us in the chamber and online. We've got rather full agenda to get through tonight. I suspect there will be a lot of interest in all of the items, but we'll work our way through it in the traditional fashion and make sure that we have sufficient time for everybody to speak. I suspect that some items will need probably a little longer than usual, just to make sure we've covered all of the areas of interest. So, have I got any apologies for this evening? Councillor Pitt. Thank you very much. So that's noted. Cabinet, you have the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of June. You've already had a copy of those. Has anybody got any questions or issues they wish to raise? In which case, can I have a show of hands that you're content that I sign those as a true record? Okay, so they're agreed as a true record. I shall just put a paw print on them for posterity. Thank you very much. In which case, then we move on to item 2, which is members' interest, to receive from members any declarations as to disclosable pecuniary or other registrable or non-registrable interests in relation to any agenda item. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I should bring it to your attention that my son is a tenant in HTC social housing.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. That's noted. Any other interest to declare? No, in which case, thank you very much. We move on then to item 3, which is the tenancy strategy. And this is to consider a report, which I think Councillor Wakeford is going to deliver for us.
Thank you, Executive Leader. This is obviously my highlight of this evening. Don't know what other people have come here for, but this is a new tenancy strategy 2023. It sets out our vision for the way that social housing providers in the district should let their properties to meet the needs of residents. It's important to underline we don't own our own housing stock, as colleagues will well appreciate, which means the level of our influence or control is at one removed compared with if we were a stock owning authority. So we're not empowered to set the rules and tell the housing associations and other social housing providers how to operate, but we are empowered to set a vision and expectations for them to have regard to, and that is what this strategy seeks to do to the fullest extent that we're able to influence them. There is a balance in seeking to discharge our duties here between putting in as much as we would like the providers to have regard to and making it so full and unreasonable and impractical for them to pay attention to that our strategy ends up having no legal weight at all, versus on the other hand, of course, wishing to make this as useful a document as possible. So it seeks to strike a balance in setting out the kinds of tenancies that providers can grant, circumstances in which they will grant particular kinds of tenancies, where they grant tenancies for certain terms, setting out lengths and circumstances in which they grant further tenancy on the coming to an end of an existing tenancy. The key change in this strategy compared with the one that preceded it, though the one that preceded it was due to conclude in 2015, so we have had a number of years without an officially stated current strategy, but we would argue that the previous one remained current, but having something that is explicitly current gives it more weight. The key change is around the use of lifetime tenancies. So the previous strategy came at a time shortly after government had tried to introduce or had introduced legislation that tried to make more efficient use of social housing stock by defaulting to 5-year fixed-term tenancies that people would have to reapply to live in their social home after a number of years, potentially repeatedly over a period. Colleagues on all sides of political chambers, metaphorical and this one here, I'm sure can see kernels of sense in that as a policy. There is sadly too limited social housing for all sorts of long-standing reasons that colleagues will be pleased I won't seek to share my historical views about. But the reality is there is not enough, so we do want to make most efficient use. However, the experience of attempting to use such tenancies, and particularly as fed back to us by the social housing providers in our district, is that it's not a sensible hoop to ask residents to jump through or a sensible use of the provider's time. The vast majority of those who have needed to reapply for their own home, as it were, continued being eligible, having previously been eligible. It wasn't demonstrably increasing stock back into the system to make it available where it otherwise wouldn't have been. And obviously, if your home is something you need to reapply for on a regular basis, that is a significant barrier to having this sort of stable existence, family life, place to bring your children up that many of our residents aspire to. So the default in here is flipped back to supporting the use of lifetime tenancies as standard, albeit with various exceptions, including where there's housing that is particularly adapted and has a particular value, a particular need. So that is all I'll say about the strategy. Overview and scrutiny had various comments which were, I think, fundamentally supportive. I was able to reassure that we had engaged with social housing providers in the district with this strategy in draft form to inform it. There was a suggestion from Councillor Gardner, ever helpfully, that going forward we might make more explicit in presentation of revisions to policies how they're changed. I think since the document is entirely restructured compared with its predecessor, perhaps we might best have met that by just including a copy of the old strategy attached in the committee papers, but that's certainly one we can reflect on what is proportionate. We did have a bit of a discussion around that lifetime versus fixed-term tenancy point and the arguments that undoubtedly do exist for in theory at least, for seeking to bring homes back into use more frequently. But I think we noted there was no easy answer, as 2.2 summarises, I think, quite neatly. So I think I'll leave it there, if I may, Executive Leader, but happy to hear any contributions from colleagues.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. Colleagues, you've been invited to comment if you wish. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wakeford, for the report. I think it's a great strategy, but I think my only concern is, how do we know, and how does this report, the strategy, get to the social housing providers? How do we know that they are going to look at this and adhere to it, or as much as possible adhere to it? You know, we set out our corporate plan that states we want everyone to live in a safe, high quality home, regardless of health, stages of life, family structure, income and tenancy type, etc. And that is really important. And it's great to have this, but how do we know that this is going to be looked at and put into place?
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. It's almost as if you have some casework experience of dealing with social landlords, imagine. No, I think that's an excellent question. And the short answer is because we are engaging with social providers. We are stepping up our level. We have stepped up our level of engagement with them. We are doing that further because in line with our broader corporate strategies around influencing and enabling beyond that which we control. We don't control the housing providers, as I outlined, but they are a critical participant in the environment we want to provide in our district for our residents, meeting other objectives. So we are engaging with them more than we have before as a council. We are certainly we will be sending the final version of this to them. As I noted, we've discussed a draft version of it with them already. We have strong contacts. We are exploring what more frequent reporting information we can expect from them around their adherence to this, as is provided for in the policy, because I think there are a number of respects in which us having confidence as to how they're able to support their tenants or what more support they need from us, from other authorities, be they seeking sources of finance, whatever else. We want to have visibility on that. So it's a work in progress, but we are seeking to act in the way that you're suggesting.
Councillor Mickelberg?
In the purely hypothetical situation where next year changes to budget projections might impact services across the council and we were looking to make savings in certain places, how might savings in the support of housing and strategy around the tenancy side of things impact our residents? Would you see that as being a significant negative for our ability to ensure that we are holding our social housing providers to the highest standards possible?
Councillor Wakeford?
Thank you. I dare say the simple answer to that question is yes, Councillor Mickelberg. I think you're touching on fundamental issues rather beyond the strategy document in front of us, but absolutely. I mean, in the most narrow terms, our resource to engage with the providers to ensure the discharge of their commitments and our expectations of them under this policy, as Councillor Taylor was getting at. Resourcing is a factor. We would already love to be doing more. I would hate that we might have to do even less.
Thank you. Are there any more comments or questions? In which case then, Cabinet, you have before you a report that you are asked to note the contents of, and then you are asked to agree the tenancy strategy. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Wakeford, can I have a seconder? Councillor Davenport-Ray, can I have a show of hands for all those in favour of agreeing the tenancy strategy? Thank you. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. I look forward to seeing that as it goes into implementation. I think a lot of us do a lot of casework with this particular group of residents, so things that support them are incredibly welcome. Thank you. In which case then we move on to item 4, which is the garden waste subscription service. And it's to consider a report on a proposed chargeable green waste collection service. And I think, Councillor Hassel, you're going to take us through this report.
Yes, thank you, Executive Chair. I think Cabinet are quite familiar with the content of this report, and really I'll give a brief sort of overview at where we are, but really the focus of my briefing at this point is to look very closely at questions that we received from both members of the public, but also from overview and scrutiny. But really just to sort of dive in to the proposal, just in case you're not fully familiar with it. The proposal is to provide a garden waste subscription service that protects garden waste services for those residents who wish to use it. And really the aim behind this is to help us to reach a financially stable position in the medium term. And at the moment, the proposal is that the service will start from the 1st of April 2024. So firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that we realise that this is not going to be the most popular proposal with residents, and I really wanted to start with a rhetorical question, really, and that is, as a brand new administration, who've just literally been in office for about 12 months, why would we do this if we didn't have to? And I think the answer is, well, we probably wouldn't. And I'd like you to think back to 12 months ago, really, is that a little over 12 months ago, we came into office, a new administration for the first time in 47 years. And one of the first things we did was to look at the finances. And I remember sitting in cabinet meetings 12 months ago with great trepidation when we actually looked to realise that we had a 2.4 million black hole and that all of our reserves, all of our savings would be eaten up over the term of our office. I mean, for me, that was a complete body blow, is that we came in 12 months ago, over 12 months ago, looking at making redundancies, cutting services, providing worse services than we currently do today. And certainly that was most distressing. But the good news is we kind of picked ourselves up. We did a very good thing, in my opinion, is that we hired Karen Sutton, who is our new Section 151 officer, who has done an outstanding job along with other officers, because we put in a program. Most of the senior officers in the council, all of the senior officers in the council had a program to reduce their costs overall. Karen went through the finances with a very practiced eye and managed to find a whole series of savings on budgets. And I think as Brett has explained at the time when we took this to budget, that we also got some extra government funding as well that we hadn't anticipated. So I felt also we should, because we have members of the public dialing in, and I just want to try and explain the problem in as simple terms as I can. So if we don't charge for garden waste, we'll have a 1.4 million deficit. And included in that is 8.3 million of potential jeopardy. And that jeopardy doesn't include inflation, which we know is at a massively high, unprecedented level in our recent times. And it doesn't include things like staff salaries, trying to combat, or energy prices. And I just wanted to explain really the problem, because it's actually quite a simple problem. Is as a council, we provide two types of service. We provide statutory services and we provide non-statutory services. Now, statutory services are those that we are legally obliged to provide. If we, for example, went bankrupt and we brought in commissioners, not only would they charge us a huge amount of money for just being here, what they would do is cut all our non-statutory services. And these are services that we know residents value. So in our case, it's things like One Leisure, it is the garden waste service, it is our country parks. And in essence, the situation we're in when we look at our medium-term financial strategy is that we're not bringing up. So effectively, our income, once we provide our statutory services, subsidises our non-statutory services. So this is income from council tax, business rates, our investments, and any money that we get from government. So that's essentially the thing, is we are not bringing in enough money in order to balance the books over the medium term. So I'd now like to move on to ONS. We had a very long ONS discussion. It went on over 3 hours. So I'm hoping to be able to summarise that, but I know others in the room will help with that. So at ONS, there was 2 recommendations. So the first recommendation was to review the impact to lower income residents. And in the report is one answer to that is the equality impact assessment. and the Equality Impact Assessment effectively recommends a council tax support proposal. And I know that Stephen has put a proposal to informal cabinet, but in essence is that we feel that in terms of helping our poorer residents, those on lower incomes, is council tax support may well be a better way than subsidising green bins. But I'm just going to hand over to Stephen because he can probably give a much more eloquent description of council tax support than I can.
Councillor
sorry.
Ferguson.
There you go. Thank you, Executive Leader. So this is good timing actually because this is about to go to public consultation on Friday. Council tax support is a benefit which is applied, a rare benefit which is given out by the district council rather than the government. And Department of Work and Pensions, which applies to around 4,000 working age people who are the people who are most in need in our district. The council tax support scheme first came into place in 2013, so a decade ago, and now in less progressive councils. So at HDC, the maximum amount of council tax support you can get is 80%, which means people who are most vulnerable, people who have the least resources, still have to pay 20% of their council tax bill, apart from some specific exceptions where they've got a child under 5 or have a severe disability. More progressive councils, so if you look across Cambridgeshire councils, traditionally conservative councils, so Fenland, East Cambs and Huntingdonshire have got this kind of 20% requirement to pay your council tax, whereas more progressive councils like South Cambs and Cambridge City Council discount to 100%. So we're putting a proposal together. The other part of this as well, of course, is that universal credit has come in the last 10 years. It complicates things quite a lot because every time you have a small fluctuation in your income, be some work, 0 hours work or some change to benefit, your benefit changes from month to month, which makes it really confusing for residents because you don't know how much council tax support you're going to get. So we're putting together a proposal which is going to consultation this week to give the most disadvantaged people a possibility of 100% support for council tax. And that's obviously going to cost us money, and it's the sort of thing we couldn't afford to have done if we didn't fill our big financial hole with green bin charging. So my view is this is exactly the sort of thing we want to do, is use our money where it's most effective, and something has to pay for that. So it's not linked to the green bin charging, other than the fact that we couldn't have done this without the financial security of having a balanced budget.
Councillor Ferguson, sorry, Councillor. Yes, thank you. Councillor Mickelberg would like to comment.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, can I just be clear on this, just for my own numbers? So we're saying that previous administrations made a deliberate choice to hold a 20% charge on council tax against a section of our poorest of community, in the community, that on a Band D property would cost about £400 a year, and they were expecting people to find that money as they were struggling to do other things like pay their rent or even feed their families. Is that what we're saying was the political decision made previously?
Yeah, it was an ideological and political decision, and you're exactly right in your analysis.
Thank you. Councillor Hassel?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. So in summary, this is a much more efficient way of getting money to the poorest people in our community, and addresses one of the key questions in overview and scrutiny. And we'll revisit that again. The other the recommendation I think we have addressed, and that was approved at overview and scrutiny. There was another recommendation which was to delay the council, which wasn't supported, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning that, on the grounds that if you are going to make a financial decision which as we've just heard, actually is going to support the council going forward, you want to make that decision as soon as you possibly can. You don't want to kick the can down the road. So I think it was excellent that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee didn't approve that recommendation, and I don't think any future recommendations to defer or delay this proposal is contrary to the financial aims of the council. So I don't know whether Brett, Councillor Mickelberg, wants to say anything further on that point.
Councillor Mickelberg?
Thank you, Chair. I can cover a couple of points from the financial side of things. I think there was a quote that came to mind that it seemed rather apt for this, which is, are we shooting ourselves in the foot just to check that the gun is working? Because as you look at this from the outside in, it does seem an odd thing to do, because we have a service that people like and care about, and yet here we are doing something that is unpopular. And the reason for that is that difficult decisions, and sometimes even good decisions, are not always necessarily popular. And that is the position that we find ourselves in. Hindsight is a marvellous thing, and if only we had the ability to govern by hindsight. But the one thing that does strike me as something that could have been done really easily in hindsight was just to gently increase council tax by the rate of inflation every year. And you think about your income tax, think about PAYE, that's when you get a pay rise, the government automatically get a little bit of your pay increase because those are the rates you've had an increase, and it just is built in naturally to it. With council tax, if you don't increase the amount of council tax by inflation, the amount that is claimed in council tax naturally declines. So it loses its real term value. If previous administrations had increased council tax just by the rate of inflation, we would have found ourselves 2 years ago at the point that every Band D property would have paid an additional £17.93 per year for their HDC element of council tax. Now, £17.93 is less than £57.50, but the amount that it would have raised would be equivalent to the gap that we find ourselves in. So unfortunately, hindsight says just those gentle increases, that ticking over of council tax by the rate of inflation would have put ourselves in the position that we wouldn't now need to do this. And this is then amplified because inflation last year was at 11%. Yet the government rules are you can only increase council tax as a district by 3%. So why don't we just increase council tax by £17.93? Because we're not allowed to. And worse than that, because inflation was 8% higher than we were able to increase council tax by, we've fallen further behind. Einstein said that compound interest is truly the miracle of mathematics. And this just puts us in exactly that position. I could be accused of being Captain Hindsight, but I'm quite happy to stand as guilty as charged on this particular one. And I think it's a really important thing that everyone around this table, everyone who forms the wider administration and the opposition should take into account as we look forward, that gentle, in line with inflation, council tax increases mean that you can plan for the future, you can do the strategic things well, you can pay good salaries, you can retain staff, and more importantly, you don't have to take big jumps and big decisions in order to make sure that you can maintain standard services and provide a level of excellence or a level of standard service to our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Mickelberg. Councillor Hassel?
Yeah, so just following on, the hindsight is a wonderful thing. I tend to look at outcomes. I think outcomes are really important. So as we looked at ONS and my observations from ONS, one of the things that came up a number of times was we don't have to compare ourselves with other councils. And as someone who comes from a business environment, the most important things is that you do compare yourself with your competitors. I don't see us particularly as competitors with other councils, but certainly we see that on the employment committee, and I see that in staffing, is that we're certainly not as competitive because, yeah, just to pick up on some of the outcome, we are the 17th lowest council tax charge in the country. That's £48 below the national average. And if you take something more locally, is that Fenland, which is actually a Conservative council, is that they raise £6.7 million more than we do in council tax. And they also charge for green waste as well. So not looking at what everyone, because let's effectively, we're all councils, we do the same things. If you do not keep abreast of what other councils are doing, then you're going to fall behind. And that, low council tax seems like a great idea. It's a great soundbite, but the reality is we're really hurting from that now. We've seen how we haven't increased council tax in line with inflation, as Councillor Mittelberg has highlighted, and ultimately, I think we need to just move forward with this particular proposal. But I just want to now start to go through the frequently asked questions, which will cover off the ONS, but also some questions that have come from local residents and also from town councils. So the first question is why is the council introducing garden waste subscription service? And I think I've explained that already, but we need to find ways to save money or generate income as rising costs and inflation combined with cuts in government grants mean there's a threat that the council could be in a potential deficit of 9.7 million. The next question is, why can't the charge be added to council tax? And the response to that is there's no legal requirement to collect garden waste, so many local authorities charge for this service in order to continue to be able to offer collections. As I've mentioned many times now, 65% of other councils in England and 50% of councils in the east of England already charge for their garden waste. In our case, we've agreed that it was important to continue to offer a garden waste collection service for residents who wish to use it rather than stop it. So we'll act in line with the majority of other councils and introduce this subscription service. But council tax itself is a mandatory payment which covers a variety of services such as fire, police, adult social care, and children's services, including education. You may not use all these services, but you still have to pay council tax. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't realise in terms of when you have a Band D council taxpayer, and it is that the tremendous value that we get from what we pay. So a Band D council taxpayer pays £3 per week at the moment for their council tax. So we're not talking huge amounts of money here. Interestingly, if you take Fenland, even with their top of the council tax league, if you like, in this area, I work that out as being £4.90 per week. And colloquially, if I asked local residents in my ward is what they would have to have their bins paid, and in general the answers I've got are somewhere between £5 and £10. The rules around administration and collection of council tax are set out within the Council Tax Administration and Enforcement Regulations in 1992. These set out in specific detail how council tax must be calculated and billed, even down to detailed instalment calculations, and provide how action for non-payment must proceed. There is no provision in law for other ad hoc charges, such as that for green bins, to be included. Within that council tax, we keep just 7 pence of every pound of council tax collected, as other elements are determined by other organisations. The council tax we retain is significantly lower than our neighbours and the national average of the shire districts, as I've talked upon earlier. So this change brings the garden waste collection in line with other not legally required pay-for services, such as bulky waste collections, which is a service paid only by the people who use it. The next question that we have been asked is charging for garden waste legal? Charging for garden waste is legal under the Controlled Waste Regulations 2012, councils can charge for the collection of garden waste. Unlike household waste and recycling, there is no legal requirement to collect garden waste, and councils can charge for collections. The income from charging for garden waste collections would make the service self-financing. Well over half of all councils in England charge for this service and have done for many years, and it's actually now up to over 65%, as I've said previously. Next question has come up a number of times. Why have the public not been consulted on the proposals? At a full council meeting in December 2022, councillors agreed to set budget principles. These budget principles included the need to protect frontline services and that non-statutory services such as garden waste collections or those that compete in a commercial environment should not be a burden on taxpayers who cannot take advantage of them. Councils sometimes have statutory requirement to consult their residents, and this is especially true for issues such as planning or redevelopments. Statutory consultations are bound by legal requirements and can have strict rules surrounding how they should be conducted. Guidance from the Local Government Association also states there are a number of situations where a consultation would not be required. This includes where a council's room for manoeuvre is limited, for example, by statutory or budgetary constraints, which I think applies in this case, and as a result, any consultation would not change the final decision. So my understanding is that Braintree paused their green bin or green waste subscription service in order to consult, and they have now moved forward with that, even though I believe they had a negative response, and the same was in Hertford as well. So asking people when you know that they are probably not going to agree to your proposal and there is no other choice is probably not the best way and use of council funds. Legally, the council is required to set a balanced budget, and given some of the financial challenges we are facing, introducing garden waste subscription services has been identified as one of the ways we can protect our frontline services and protect service cuts. The next question is, this will impact on lower income households in the district and those on lower council tax bands. What will be done to support those people? I think with Stephen's comments and Brett's comments, I think we've very highly adequately covered this point. But it also, I think the other point is that not all households with garden bins use the service. Out of 83% of properties that can access the service, 30% don't regularly use it. So in its own way, this is a fairer service. But specifically, residents in our district who need additional information, advice and guidance can contact the Residents' Advice and Information Team, who take time to assess the person's personal circumstances and work with them to suggest suitable and sustainable changes and routes to small funding pots that can help them to achieve their goals. We will continue to encourage residents on lower incomes to contact the Residents' Advice and Information Team to explore the ways that they may be able to reduce their household expenditure and apply for funding if the retention of a garden waste collection service is important to their household to maintain positive physical and mental health. And sort of going back to the consultation piece is that the financial decision I think we're going to make here tonight, but all the how we do this decisions, we are very, very willing to consult with residents and town and parish councils. The next question is, what impact will this have on the environment and our carbon dioxide reductions? And so firstly, not all properties in Huntingdonshire require the service, and only those residents who have a need for the service will subscribe. This approach will reduce vehicle movement numbers and positively reduce the carbon dioxide emissions of the waste collection service, supporting the council's target of carbon zero by 2040. So the forecasted emissions for a chargeable garden waste service is 803 tonnes of CO2, and this is a almost 370 tonne reduction from our current garden waste service. These are based on the carbon warm factor calculations from DEFRA. Another point on this particular topic is garden waste can also be composted or used for mulch. These approaches are much better for the environment than our current collection methods. Next question, will people just put their garden waste in the grey bin, adding to operational costs and decreasing environmental benefits? So currently, 42% of the waste we collect in grey bins is organic waste. And we want to work with our local community to find better ways to reduce, recycle, reuse, and collect all waste. Approximately 70% of food waste from UK households that enters the residual waste stream is edible. So by cutting food waste, reusing it, making another meal out of the waste from our meal, the average UK household can save £500 each year. So there is a behavioural change associated with this proposal. We can also expect to see a large volume of garden waste being prevented as residents change their behaviour and adopt new approaches to maintaining their gardens and home composting. The next question is, can I share my bin with my neighbour? If so, how will this be managed? People will be able to make a personal arrangement with a neighbour to share the cost of the additional garden bin service. We would allocate the bin to the property that pays for it and will withdraw it if payment is not received. If people share their garden waste bin with a neighbour, the householder who pays the annual charge will have the overall responsibility for the bin, as a bin can only be allocated to one address. It would be the responsibility of the named householder if the bin is contaminated, misused, or needs replacing. So you can share your bin with your neighbours, but you're responsible for it. Its maintenance and replacement if necessary. Were other alternatives to introducing a subscription service considered? I think I covered some of the other financial alternatives earlier on, but specifically with the green waste service, other options such as pausing collections in the winter or collecting every 3 weeks were considered. However, by introducing a subscription service that's provided all year round, we'll be able to protect our frontline services and maintain a balanced budget and set a sustainable medium-term financial strategy, which is the primary objective of this proposal. Currently, again, emphasising that the cost of the garden waste collection is distributed amongst all taxpayers through funding diverted from other services. So this is a current situation, regardless of their usage or benefit. By directly charging for this service, we establish a system where those who actively utilise the service contribute to its funding. The penultimate question, will this lead to an increase in fly tipping? So as we've said many times now, about 65% of English waste collection authorities have introduced a charge for collecting garden waste, and they have not reported an increase in fly tipping. Officers have been investigating the likelihood of increased fly tipping based upon data from authorities that have already charged for garden waste collections. This data shows that the majority have not seen any increase in incidence of garden waste fly tipping, with only a handful of reporting a marginal increase in the first year of implementation. Andy Rogan, who is our expert officer on this, says that the instances that we currently see of fly tipping are generally people who have had people doing work on their garden. So they've brought in a contractor to maybe do some landscaping, and then they will dump a trailer load of garden waste and spoilage into the environment. To reassure people, we do have existing effective methods for clearing waste and prosecuting offenders, and can issue anyone caught fly tipping with a fixed penalty notice of £1,000. Serious offences of fly tipping are punishable by an unlimited fine or up to 5 years in prison. In addition, we invested in new technologies such as improved closed-circuit television cameras, as well as supporting national campaigns to tackle fly tipping. And then finally, won't this increase pressure on the district's recycling centres and concerns for management of increased traffic on highways? We have a close working relationship with Cambridgeshire County Council, and with them we'll monitor to see if there's an increased pressure on our household recycling centres. So one final point, and then I'm just going to hand back for comments and any questions. My final observation from ONS, and it was a very, very long meeting, and I did give people and ask the question, is there any other alternative? So our proposal on the table is, we're going to charge for garden waste, the garden waste subscription service. Is there an alternative? And no alternative was given from ONS. So with that, I'm going to hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hussle. Thank you. An incredibly detailed report, and I appreciate you covering those very pertinent issues which I know the public have raised. I have read Facebook comments, I've seen correspondence, I've received correspondence, and I've had discussions, like I suppose many of us probably have, in our wards and with residents. So thank you for covering those. I hope that will answer a lot of the questions already raised. Let me come to Councillor Wakeford, then Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Hassel, for setting that out so methodically. Look, there are different ways we might tackle this discussion tonight, but it feels to me like there's a distinction it's helpful to draw in the reflections we need to make. There are a great number of questions and concerns from residents shared with us directly and as raised through our scrutiny process, as the Executive Leader alluded to just then. And that's where I suspect we will want to focus most of our consideration this evening. There has also, though, been just a little bit of party political game playing in attempts by our single opposition group to seek some, I think, unwarranted political advantage over this. And on reflection, I do think it would be helpful to address that directly first, in order then to set it aside. As Councillor Hassel referenced, and we well know, the budget we inherited when we formed an administration a year ago had more than an 8 million gap or black hole across its forward-looking element. The MTFS period, he explained. The budget was produced by the previous Conservative administration, and of course they knew they would need to fill the hole in the MTFS in due course. But in the months before our election into power last year, while we were scrutinising their budget as ordinary councillors, those of us on the council at the time at least, we didn't have much luck in understanding how they were planning to do it. In this room, while I was on the scrutiny panel, I specifically asked the Conservative finance lead and member of cabinet at the time about how he was going to fill the hole and why he wasn't more worried about it. I got a very polite response because he is a very charming man, but it was not illuminating. That finance lead, of course, is now leader of the Conservative group. He was actually in the public gallery here with front bench colleagues during the scrutiny panel. As they're not here tonight, I'm going to guess they might be part of our audience online this evening. His press release in recent days criticising the proposals in this paper claims that his group has opposed a green waste subscription charge time and time again. Opposed it from whom, colleagues? None of us ever proposed a green waste charge here previously. They were the ones in administration for nearly 50 years straight, as Councillor Hassel reminded us. This can only be a reference to internal debates among themselves. So presumably, some Conservatives have supported doing it sooner, others not, but it was clearly by their own admission and volunteering in that release an option they gave consideration to while in office. And on balance, they opposed doing it when it wasn't necessary. And I'm sure all of us around this table would have agreed with them on that too. But were they expecting to have to do differently if they formed yet another administration, as they and we, frankly, of course, all expected, to run the council through this current term? Well, a Conservative member made a comment about their manifesto for this term of office at the scrutiny meeting that discussed these proposals. For the previous term, for 2018 to 2022, the Conservative manifesto, I still have a copy of, promised green bin collections will continue free of charge, with free in block capitals for absolute clarity. But their manifesto last year for this current term was phrased rather differently. It noted Huntingdonshire is one of the few councils that still provides a green bin service at no extra charge. Well, that's definitely true, as we've noted in discussion. But their commitment was merely to continue to provide green bin collection services. The commitment to this being provided for free was dropped. A cynic, colleagues, might say, by their own admission, they'd repeatedly been discussing green bin charges internally, time and time again, in the words of the press release. They knew there was a multi-million-pound budget gap that needed filling, because they wrote the previous budget and MTFS that set this out. They carefully removed the word free from their manifesto promises about green bins as they went into the last election, so surely they were laying the ground to make precisely the same decision before us tonight. Not because they wanted to. Evidently, they did not any more than we do, but because they knew they would have to. So, Executive Leader, as you know, I'm not a cynic, but given the facts, I think our residents could be forgiven for reaching that conclusion. As it happens, the Conservative member who referenced their manifesto in scrutiny claimed that they promised to keep garden bins, green bins, free. I'm sure that was an entirely innocent mistake, but it wasn't accurate. I do wonder, though, if it indicates that Conservative members standing last year did not actually all realise the severity of the financial challenge that Councillor Hassel's reminded us of, or exactly what commitments they were standing on in order to be able to address it. That might explain some of the reactions to the paper before us here this evening from them, when neighbouring councils run by Conservative administrations have made exactly the same decision to plug declining national government funding of their services with a charge on green waste collection. As Councillor Hassel also set out, the green waste subscription charge was included in the MTFS as part of our budget this year. Opposition groups, as part of that budget setting process, have the opportunity to propose their own alternative budget or amendments to our budget to show how they think we should be balancing the budget instead, the alternatives that Councillor Hassel touched on. When they were in charge previously, I led a group of just 3 councillors out of 52 in the chamber with no chance of taking control, and they argued we still had to propose an alternative budget in order to be taken seriously in criticising theirs. They're a group of 21 councillors, the largest single group on this council, and with aspirations of taking control at any moment if our joint administration fell. Did they propose any costed alternative to removing green waste charging, showing what they would do instead? No, colleagues, we all know they didn't. So if they have a secret plan for cutting critical council services or raising other charges to balance the books instead, they aren't sharing it with us and they aren't sharing it with the public. So finally, back on scrutiny last week, there were some comments from Conservative members about running a multi-million-pound deficit being okay. That will be a surprise to anyone who's seen certain local authorities literally go bankrupt around the country in recent months and years at huge cost to their residents in loss of services and then rocketing of council tax to make up for it. And ignoring a rocketing projected deficit didn't work very well for one Liz Truss last year, and we are all paying the costs of that, as our residents are, as we know, all too well. But there was also a Conservative councillor at the scrutiny panel who I think made one of the most illuminating contributions of the evening. He suggested we should look at saving the money to fill the budget gap by cutting things that affect fewer people instead. Councillor Hassel asked, not unreasonably, what things he had in mind, as that was the clearest we got to hearing an alternative from the Conservative group all evening, and frankly all municipal year. The answer was to acknowledge it was a difficult one, but he said they were just the opposition, it wasn't for them to come up with the answers. In my view, that may be a perfectly respectable position, but in that case, and especially in light of the context I've drawn attention to in these remarks, I think the shrill tone of some of the criticism isn't credible when we, as a joint administration, multiple political groups are coming together to do this not because we want to, but because we feel we have no alternative in the interests of our residents. So, colleagues, I hope that deals with some of the political aspects and lets us focus on our residents' concerns with these proposals in much of the rest of the debate this evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hassel actually answered a number of the questions that I was going to put with his frequently asked questions. So that was very handy. That was very useful. A couple of things from me. I picked up, I think it was Councillor from Scrutiny, I attended the meeting as well. Councillor Corley, who represents Great Staunton, seemed to suggest that we were being unduly pessimistic about our financial situation. But I think it was a point made perhaps by yourself, Councillor Hassel, that we get a one-year settlement from central government, not the 2 years that we were promised previously by Michael Gove when I think he was in his first incarnation as DLUC Secretary. So it's very difficult for us to anticipate what is around the corner, as Councillor Mickelberg said. Inflation 11% earlier in the year doesn't seem to be slowing down significantly at all. And I believe our Section 151 officer also said that it wouldn't be possible to sign off our accounts if we didn't deal with that deficit. So I just wondered perhaps if either of you could just clarify that for me. My second point is, and I think Councillor Hassel dealt with it, a lot of people say to me, well, people will fly tip or they'll cross-contaminate, they'll put their green waste in the grey bin instead. That doesn't seem to be the experience from other authorities that charge. And as we heard, two of our neighbouring councils, Peterborough City and Fenland District, also charge as we're proposing to do through this report. And just finally, I think we dealt with this at the start of the debate, and Councillor Ferguson laid it out very clearly for us. Councillor Hunt obviously proposed, and that was approved, concerns that effectively then this would perhaps penalise people on low income residents. We need to complete a review of that or the impact. I know it's not directly linked, but I think my feeling is that we believe that the council tax support scheme, which we're going out to consultation with, would actually significantly help this. And as Councillor Mickelberg pointed out, that's not something that happened before. So they're my sort of points and questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. I don't know whether either of Councillor Hassel or Councillor Mickelberg wants to come back in. I think there's a decision. I think, Councillor Mickelberg, it's been handed to you.
Thank you, Chair. I can just cover the high level of the MTFS, which I think probably sets a good tone as to where we would find ourselves. So without introducing the garden waste charge, we would find ourselves with a projected deficit in 2027-28 of £2.29 million, which is worse than the previous year's suggested deficit of £1.2 million. These are all big numbers in red, which is not the healthy place that we want to be. More importantly, the inability to plan strategically is what is at the heart of elements of this. As you say, that 1 year settlement means that we don't know what's going to come next year. We're having to wait until the last minute. And if you can't recruit project teams, or you can't recruit members of staff because you're assured that you're going to have the funds to pay them, that you're going to be able to implement these projects, that you're going to be able to make the improvements that we want to make for our residents, you can't do so unless you have that strategic certainty of those funding lines. And that is key. Paying for everything off the credit card catches up with you in the end. Taking the hard decision now and making sure that we've got the money to pay for these things in advance undoubtedly hands us the ability to make Huntingdonshire the best place for our residents without that concern of the financial wolf forever being at our door.
Thank you, Councillor Mickelberg. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I have a question and then I'll contribute to the debate if we get to that point. In section 9 of the report that's before us, it talks about the different stages that we would attempt if this is approved. So it appears that if this is approved, between now and April 2024, that's when we would be thinking about how do we support the most vulnerable residents through this process and how do we implement it. But then in April 2025, performance to be reported back through the political cycle. When we got to that point, April 2025, what performance is going to be assessed, or what feedback are we looking for at that point to assess the success or lack of success of this scheme?
Councillor Hassel.
Yeah, I can't at this stage answer that absolutely precisely because I've got questions out with officers on exactly what they want to measure, but a lot of the things that we've answered questions on, so for example, the amount of carbon dioxide being saved, the amount of, for example, organic matter in going into grey bins, but also on things like pricing. So I think the position that we're taking is one of being proactive, and if you're going to make any financial decision like this, is in order to balance the books, you need to be proactive. If you procrastinate on it, then your benefit is not going to be as good. But in a situation where, for example, a lot more people subscribe to the service that we expected, or we had a much more benevolent government, for example, is that we might be in a position where we would consider in the second year changing the price. All those things are up for grabs, and I think from now until April, I think there's lots of opportunities to say, well, these are the things that we want to measure, not least of which is getting an understanding of how much people's behaviour is changing, how much composting we're doing, and things like that. So some of the data that we can see is actually highly refined. I've learned a lot about waste over the last few weeks, and there's a lot of analysis goes on what we put in our bins, and it's very interesting. Well, for me anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Hassel. We've sort of asked lots of questions. Is there anything else that anybody would like to share at this stage before we then move to making some decisions? Councillor Davenport-Ray, you did say that you might like to come in on debate. Does anybody else want to signal as well that they want to to contribute before we make decisions? No, in which case, Councillor Davenport-Ray, the last bit is with you.
Thank you. I think this topic is probably the most difficult decision that all of us have had put before us in our first year at the council. And I've certainly spoken to many residents about this topic over the past few weeks. Their questions and challenges are the same worries that have troubled me for many months. And when I was first presented with the option of creating a subscription service for garden waste, I was honestly quite shocked. And I see Councillor Taylor shaking her head as well. I think we've been through a similar journey over the last year. And so I've spent those many months researching and investigating what are the alternatives, what are our other options. And to meet our current year's budget, council services have been pared back so much that, in my opinion, more efficiency cuts would actually cause harm to services that are essential for local people in crisis. And yet, more money still needs to be found to solve the budget problems in future years. So council staff have looked at many different options for savings. All of them were very difficult for me to hear. So could we live without an in-person information desk for residents? Could we cut back the call center and expect residents to only contact us online? Could we be less helpful when residents become homeless? Could we have fewer staff available to assist residents who are in crisis? Could we drastically increase our car parking charges? And some of these options would directly impact the residents that are the most vulnerable. However, even if many of these cuts were applied together, it would still not provide enough income to solve our future budget problems. And the need to prioritize the residents that are in crisis came pretty firmly home to me yesterday when I was attending a homeless hostel in St. Neots as part of my day job. There are many reasons why people end up in places like this. Some are fleeing violence, some are victims of no-fault evictions. Some people simply fall through the gaps because they can't read and write, or they've been in and out of care throughout their life. And these people in crisis struggle to feed and clothe their family and have rarely had the privilege of a garden to enjoy. There's a part of our population who have nothing, they have nowhere, and they live life on the edge. And the needs of these residents in crisis and those that are likely to fall into crisis have to be our first priority. I also explored some options around collecting waste less often, which I think also has some carbon savings that could be achieved. So could green bin waste be collected just once a month? Could green bins only be collected during the summer? Could green bins only be collected on demand? Or could our black bins even be collected less often? And the savings that were calculated for these options were all much less than I anticipated, mainly because the council would make savings in fuel and carbon emissions, but it would still need to maintain our bin lorries, our bin collection crews, and our back office staff throughout the entire year. However, I think that should our council face any more unexpected budget pressures in the future, we may well be forced to explore these additional types of cuts in our waste services. So after a year of investigation, I've concluded that there are really only two viable options to the problem before us. Neither one is comfortable. The first is, do we cut all green bin collections and stop the service altogether? The second is, do we build a subscription service that funds and protects green bins for residents that want to use it? And I would certainly prefer for our council to trial a subscription service before we even consider cutting a service altogether. And although these conclusions on this topic are financial, there are possible benefits in carbon reduction in making this decision as well. So as Councillor Hassel mentioned, fewer diesel bin lorries driving around our countryside, and residents being challenged to reduce their black bin waste, to reduce their recycling waste, and to reduce their garden waste. After listening to the scrutiny meeting earlier this month, I sympathized with all of the emotions that councillors expressed on behalf of their residents. I was particularly moved by Councillor Criswell's expression of anger on this topic. Anger is a very powerful emotion, and I feel angry too. But my anger is firmly directed at our central government, a government that year on year provides less real terms funding for councils, a government that makes councils compete against each other for money, a government that forces councillors like us to choose between helping residents in need and providing vital assistance to residents in a crisis. This is also a government that cares so little about its own carbon targets that it dictates new services for councils to provide, like collecting food waste, with no funding to make it happen. And I would love for our council to collect food waste on its own and ensure it is fully diverted from landfill but the government continues to drag its feet. This is why I'm proud that our local Green Party has created a petition directly to government, asking DEFRA to enforce and fund the collection of food waste unmixed with other rubbish. The Environment Act clearly sets out this requirement, but government has stalled for 4 years without providing guidance or funding. Decisions like the one before us this evening are clearly driven by a central UK government that does not value the vital services provided by local councils and increasingly ignores its own carbon targets. And so it's with regret that I have concluded a subscription service for garden waste is the least worst option that allows our council both to continue a service that residents value, but also protect the vital support our council provides to the most vulnerable people in our district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport-Ray. So many things you said are part of my personal struggle with this. It has been a very uncomfortable period looking at this as a proposal. And like you, I personally have wished for there to be any other viable solution. So thank you very much for articulating that so well. Colleagues, if you are content, we have a series of recommendations before us this evening. And if you are content, I'm going to propose that we take them en bloc. Does that find favour before I move that? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Can I just check how many recommendations we have before us following scrutiny meeting last month?
Thank you, Councillor Davenport-Ray. We have 7 as set out in the paper. A to G. Is that what you're expecting? That's what my paper shows. Councillor Hassel, sorry, were you going to come in at that point?
I think we were going to vote on the extra recommendation coming from overview and scrutiny.
I'm just going to take advice.
Take advice.
So with the proposal that scrutiny forwarded, it is entirely up to you as Cabinet whether you choose to add that recommendation to your paper or not. You don't have to consider it. If you would like to consider it and take a vote on it, you can do. If you choose not to, it's just their opinion and their comments being forwarded to you. Councillor Hassel?
I think we would like to take that recommendation from an ONS. I think it makes sense, and I think we hopefully have addressed those points, because it does address very much the concerns of how best to deal with the most vulnerable people in our community.
So if you'll beg my indulgence just one moment, we're just scrolling through the paper to find the wording. Would you like to read it for us?
Yes, so the additional suggestion which ONS wanted to add as a recommendation is to agree to complete a review of the impact of the introduction of a household waste subscription service on lower income residents.
I personally would be content with that. Does anybody have any objection to us adding that? Okay, so I see no objections around the room, in which case then the proposal before you is to accept recommendations A to H, with that additional one being added. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Hassel, a seconder? Councillor Mickelberg? Can I have a show of all those in favour, please? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, Cabinet. I appreciate this has not been an easy decision, and I look forward to moving into a phase where we can work with parishes, towns, our residents, to look at how we might move forward in implementation. In which case then, colleagues, it's 8:15. We move to the final item. So I'm just going to take advice, because this is an item which is a restricted item.
So Chris is now just stopping the stream.
So just before we do that, Chris, have you actually stopped the stream? We paused just slightly. I wanted to just explain, because I'm grateful a number of you have joined us watching online. This item is a restricted item. and therefore we at this point need to exclude the press and the public. So I'm going to read the statement, then those that are in the room will depart, and those that are online, we will close the meeting. Because it's the last item, we are not going to reopen the meeting. So for those of you who are waiting to have your tea, by all means, this is a good point, but I will read the statement. So it's resolved that the press and public be excluded from the meeting because the business to be transacted contains exempt information relating to financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. And with that, I'd like to wish everybody a good evening and invite everybody now to depart.